Salam to all. I sat down to meditate this morning, as I do every morning. And one of my practices, my Sufi practices, is to repeat the name of one of God's names. One of these divine names is a way of not only connecting with the divine without, but the divine within, a way of getting to know God and getting to know you. And as I sat there and I was repeating a Latif, within a minute I found myself crying, which wasn't unusual. I do this often. I have found the best therapist. And it ain't a human form. I sat there and I kept repeating and I kept repeating and the tears kept coming. And then eventually this guilt came up. And a conversation I'd had yesterday came up. I had done a coaching session for a young Syrian nurse, a brilliant young man who was there during the siege of Aleppo. I mean, what this young man must have seen and been through, not only beyond any horror most of us can imagine, but the fact that he was sitting there, he had asked to be coached because he wanted to better himself and he wanted to learn English and he wanted to graduate from studies. But the conversation inevitably came to what often happens with so many Syrians I speak to is, should I leave? And as he was talking through the daily humiliations, the daily troubles, the things that wouldn't even make the news because they're no longer newsworthy, but they are the daily humiliations and the daily troubles of living in a war zone. And this guilt started to rise within me. A familiar feeling that I have felt and known so intimately over these last years. And guilt, I'm sure, is something that all of you here will know and recognize. And it's funny because my ex-husband used to be incredulous when I would be guilty. He'd be like, why are you feeling guilty? Like, you are doing so much. You are literally spending every evening, weekend, like holiday working on this humanitarian response. Like, you should not be feeling guilty. But I did. And for a very long time, I thought it was a great motivating factor. And I remember one day, it was about 12 weeks into my pregnancy, and I was just feeling the joys of life. I was elated, rubbing my belly. I really just didn't think this was going to happen. So I was over the moon, and suddenly this intrusive images and intrusive thoughts of children who we couldn't save in Syria came up. And suddenly this nasty voice came down and it was like, how dare you? How dare you be happy? How dare you be joyful? So many people are suffering in the world. Sit down and get on with your effing work. And for a long time, I didn't recognize that voice as shame. And I didn't know that shame was one of the signs of trauma. And so my first message to anybody here who does have that voice of shame, please know that this is not normal. This is not great. This is the sign of trauma, and to please seek help. And as I continued in my meditation and my tears continued and my guilt continued, and I continued to chant, Al-Latif, 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 I suddenly was awash with gratitude. And I'd remembered my own practice that I actually, created about 3 or 4 years ago about turning guilt into gratitude. Because here's the thing. Guilt, for the most part, unless you've done something that you need to be remorseful and forgive yourself or someone else needs to forgive you for the most part, guilt diminishes us. It contracts us. It is not a positive force or energy from which to act. And what we actually truly need when we are in those moments of feeling, oh my God, I have and you don't, is not to descend into guilt, but to rise into gratitude. So many studies have shown that literally if gratitude was a pill, we would all be taking it. It is phenomenal for our well-being. And if you, instead of just being grateful, were actually grateful to God, to Source, to the universe, to the great mystery, to the goddess, whatever, to Tao, to Chi, whatever you want to call it, then watch that gratitude elevate your life, not just at a well-being level, but you will radiate it. Because gratitude turns that feeling that we had, the lead of guilt, into giving, into generosity. It's the truly abundant who is generous. And so, I ask you today, what are you grateful for? And what could be one small gesture of giving that you could give as a symbol of that gratitude? I hope you will accept this gesture from me as my symbol of gratitude. Thank you for watching and for being here with me. And if anything that I said in this video touched you and you want to talk about it, then DM me. Salam.